For as long as humans have existed, there's been an extreme urge to count stuff. We want to organize and calculate everything into a neat, pristine style. We create orders of magnitude measuring lengths, weights, and volumes. We arrange words and letters to create sentences. And, of course, we have the unending, unquenchable desire to name everything. So naturally, one of the first things we just had to do was count time. It was surprisingly easy to do. Every day, the sun in the sky rises for about 12 hours, and then disappears for about 12 hours. Every 29.5 days, this glowing rock called the moon changes shapes from full to dark, and back again. And every 365 days, it gets really cold, then really hot. Perpetually. Day after day. But somewhere along the line, we came up with this thing called the week. Where did that thing come from? And why do we need to throw 7 days into it? That's what we're going to find out on this episode of Stuff You've Probably Wondered with Captain McMuffin. Like I said, the week ultimately serves no purpose. It was never a natural cycle like the other methods of counting and is altogether arbitrary. It's just a way of cutting up months into more organized set pieces. So why do we use it and where did it come from? To find out, we have to start out in the 4th century CE. During this time, the Roman Emperor Constantine decreed that Christianity should be the official religion of the empire. But because there were plenty of Jews living in that time, it was probably a good idea that he implement a few of their ideas into official business. Thus, the Julian calendar was born, a new type of counting system that added 2 months to the original 10, July and August, and used the Jews' proud week, which in Latin was pronounced visus, meaning turn. So it wasn't the Romans who created the week after all, it was the Jews. So how did they come up with such a strange unit of measure such as the week? According to their records, this was a topic of religious meaning, as most things were in that day. The Jews' holy text, the Old Testament, mentioned their God Yahweh, who gave Moses the 10 Commandments. While a few of these commanded Yahweh's people to never lie or commit adultery, Yahweh was a rather needy God, and proclaimed that every day his people should work, but set aside every 7th day to worship him, but also rest from the previous 6 days' work. But while this seems legitimate, we don't actually have any records of Moses' fated meeting with Yahweh until 1000 BCE, a whole millennia before it actually happened. So as it turns out, the Jews had not created the 7-day week either, they just implemented it like the Romans. The Jews had actually reaped the 7-day week from a much older civilization, the Babylonians. Now, while the Jews and the Babylonians weren't exactly on speaking terms, literally, according to Jewish texts, those fiends made a tower that caused whole nations to speak different languages. Go figure. A lot of things were taken from Babylonian civilization. Their 7-day week, for example. The Babylonians used the week to set individual days aside for each of their gods, and one of these, Shamash, sounds a lot like the French's name for one of their days, Dimanche. Sunday. Unfortunately, the comparisons stopped there, so not even a civilization as old as the Babylonians invented the 7-day week. But now where can we turn? We've traveled back in time nearly 4,000 years. As it turns out, we're going to have to travel further still. Much further. 10,000 years ago, mankind was just starting to evolve into its intelligent self we all know and love today. During this time, we were living in caves and wiping with leaves, but we were also looking outside our little communities. We were staring into the sky and wondering what those specks of light were. Ancient observers noticed that while most of the specks moved together in a pattern, a few weaved patterns of their own. Aside from the sun and moon, these specks were different. They must have their own consciousness, an outside way of knowing that today we might call divinity. With that, societies of hairless apes began to worship these specks as natural forces that control everything they knew, and began to name them. 7 divine beings, sacred things that these early humans' descendants would soon come to learn. And as the times changed, so too did people want to implement these magical specks into their daily lives as much as possible. They began to use the moon as a marker, and they were able to figure out that the 7 days could fit just about 4 times in the cycle of the moon. Thus, we can travel forward 8,000 years to the Romans who named the days of their week after their own gods, as did the Germanic folk we call the Norse. And when we compare these to our present-day days, we find that they're pretty similar. So now we know that the week has a far deeper meaning than we originally thought. It's not a scientific natural force that we can calculate, but it is a connection for our ancient ancestors. They wanted to learn everything around them, and the week was just a method for them to get closer to those little specks in the sky they loved so much. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you have any questions you'd like me to answer, leave it in the comments or email me at captainmcmuffin@gmail.com. Also, researching this topic made me wonder about the way we organize the days, months, weeks, and years, so I decided to look at some types of calendars outside our good friend the Gregorian. There are some pretty bizarre ones out there, so you should definitely click the link if you want more awesome knowledge on our weird counting habits. Enjoy that, and I'll see you next time on Stuff You've Probably Wondered.